Welcome, everybody. My name's Emma Lindley. And for those of you that don't know me, I've been in the digital identity space for around 20 years. I started out life working with gambling regulators and operators in the UK in 2005 when the first gambling regulation passed. And in later years, my work has expanded out globally. We're going to be talking today about two subject matters close to my heart, one about gambling regulation and two about Brazil. For those of you that don't know, the gambling sector in Brazil already generates around 4 billion reais in Brazil, and it's estimated to triple in size by 2026. Joining me here today, I'm delighted to say I've got a real expert to give some top insights on those topics. Luiz Felipe Meyer is one of the founding partners at his law firm, where he heads up the technology and gaming area. He's a member of the International Masters of Gaming Law and one of the authors of the Gambling Law Review and of Chambers and Partners Gambling Law Practice Guide for Brazil. He's a frequent speaker at international gaming events, was ranked amongst the best gaming lawyers in the world by Chambers and Partners in 2021 and 22, and as the best gaming lawyer in Brazil by Who's Who Legal 2021 and 2022. Welcome, Luiz.
Thank you, Emma. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So before I go to my first question, for anyone that has questions for Luiz or myself, please put them in the chat and we'll respond live to the questions. So first question for you, Luiz. Brazil's taken a huge amount of time really to move forward with the regulation. Where are we now and what are the timelines and your predictions for the regulation going forward?
Well, when we talk about regulation, we have to differentiate gambling in general, meaning online casino, land-based casino, bingos, and everything else, and sports betting. Sports betting was legalized in 2018, and the Ministry of Economy was supposed to have it regulated within 4 years. The deadline for the regulation is now in December, but now we're facing a transition of government in Brazil. We're going to have a new president starting next year. Lula was elected again, and Bolsonaro lost the election. And because of all the transition negotiations and all the confusion that comes with that, we don't know if the regulation will be published in time. As a matter of fact, regulation is ready to be signed by the president since March. He decided not to sign it because of the election. He was supposed to sign it right now, and we're waiting, but there is no sign that it's going to be signed until the end of the year. On the other front, we have gambling. The Gambling Bill of Law was approved by the Chamber of Deputies in February. And now it needs to be voted by the Senate. And also, we don't know when that's going to happen.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, two pieces of legislation, but we still don't have a clear timeline for when they're going to be enacted.
Yeah, it can be at any time.
Okay, so I mean, I've spent over 16 years working in and around the gambling industry, and I'm really familiar with regulations in places like the UK and Denmark, and they've obviously had regulation in place for many years. What do you think the key things are that Brazil could learn from those markets?
Well, there's so much that Brazil can learn from the UK and Denmark. I think if you want to stick with age and identity verification, anti-money laundering, I think we are talking maybe about the two pieces of regulations that have perhaps if I won't say the more sophisticated, but at least the most functional solutions. I think one of the things that we need to learn in terms of regulation in general is that it makes no sense to limit the number of operators in the market. That a competitive market is the best option for the players, because then you have the incentive for the operators to provide the best service possible. Taxation-wise, we have a lot to learn as well. When the Sports betting bill was approved in 2018. Taxation was based on turnover. After a while, after 3 years, we managed to convince the Congress to change the taxation to GGR. But we still have a very heavy taxation on winnings. It makes no sense if you want to stimulate the market, stimulate the local players to choose the local operators instead of the offshore.
Yeah, you need to make the kind of tax regime work for the local operators, don't you, to incentivize the market to start moving in that direction?
Yeah. I think in terms of age verification in Brazil, we already have a law, which is the Statute of the Child and Adolescent from 1990, that provides some guidelines in terms of age verification. It is a crime to provide gambling services to minors in Brazil. If you sell, supply, serve, administer, or deliver any service or product that can generate physical or psychological dependence to minors, it's a crime in Brazil. So the whole discussion about about the onboarding of the players and age verification, when it should be done, if it should be like in the UK, where now you have 72, you had 72 hours to do it, and now you have to do it before the deposit or at the time of the deposit. In Brazil, it's going to be very clear that age verification needs to be done before a deposit is accepted. If you allow a deposit to be made by a minor and allow the minor to play, regardless whether the minor receives the prize or not, that's a crime.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And because one of the things that happened in the UK market certainly is they used to have this window of 72 hours, which you've just referred to. And, what they did was they then moved that. And this is one of the kind of unintended consequences of moving and removing that window of 72 hours. What then happened was they said, well, it needs to be a point of registration, the verification. What's actually happened in the UK is that's meant that it's actually, from a gambling industry perspective, it's actually increased things like identity fraud and fraud being used on gambling companies, because the fraudsters then have to steal real identities. And I think that's one of the things that, certainly the Brazilian market needs to think about is, if it does get moved to earlier in the process at the point of registration, how do you then have those checks to make sure that those identities are not actually stolen?
Yeah, yes. Trying to prevent or avoid fraud will be a huge challenge for the industry in Brazil. I will let you talk about this, but Brazil is a haven for fraudsters. I would say that the creativity of the Brazilian people can be used for the good and the bad. And you see a lot of different types of frauds in Brazil. I'll give you an example. Recently, we had a case where the fraudsters, in Brazil, we have a payment slip called boleto. So what they did is they used a betting website, a sports betting website, to issue several boletos. They used the barcode in a fake utility bill and sent through the mail or for email to thousands of people. Some of them would pay, and that payment, it was considered as a deposit at the fraudster's account, and the fraudster would just withdraw the funds.
Yeah. And I mean, fraud really impacts the industry from a player perspective, in terms of confidence that they have in, you know, the gambling companies and the betting companies that they actually place their bets with. And that's, again, certainly something that, you know, I've seen in the UK market. And, you know, fraud is, interestingly, I think, you know, when I started working in the gambling industry, because gambling companies, betting companies, sports betting companies, when they moved online, certainly in the UK and in some of the European markets, they were some of the first companies to actually move any of their services online. So even before the banks moved online in 2005. And I think what I saw certainly then was that those gambling companies had, you know, the kind of the best and the state of the art fraud detection systems. And I think, you know, one of the challenges that the gambling industry has is, you know, it's this tension all the time between they really want to onboard, you know, as many players as they possibly can and give them a great customer experience. But then it's how much friction do you put in the process, you know, in terms of fraud prevention and some of those barriers that perhaps fraud prevention technologies can end up creating for players to help prevent that fraud. But certainly keeping fraud down for the industry is going to be a really important thing. And I'm sure, you know, that's something that you've been looking at in the Brazilian market for sure.
Yeah. And in Brazil, I'd say that they have another challenge. It's very cheap and very accessible for anyone to sue a company in Brazil. Because of our consumer protection rules, the burden of proof is usually inverted. So if a consumer sues the operator that is based in Brazil, the judge can easily change the burden of proof so that the operators need to prove that what the consumer is saying is not true. When the beginning of my career, I used to work in the energy sector, and one of my missions as the legal counsel was to deal with over 4,000 lawsuits in a single state in the northeast of Brazil. So we are talking about thousands of potential lawsuits, and it's common that the fraudsters create situations where they can sue the company.
Mm-hmm.
This is also another very frequent fraud modality in Brazil. They try to create some. We had a case recently involving gambling operators in Brazil, where what they did was the player made a deposit and instantly tried to withdraw the funds. And since that was not allowed, the one lawyer from the state of Bahia over 15 claims from consumers asking for indemnifications and so on, losses and indemnifications. And the point is, we noticed that they were new players. They were all gathered by this lawyer to create this kind of situation and to create this as an excuse to sue the payment company, because since the operator is not in Brazil, they were suing the payment company.
What are the? I mean, I'm really interested to know, you know, your perspective on the Brazilian market, specifically in gambling and fraud. What are the most common types of fraud that you've come across? We talked about a few examples there, and how do you think that's going to change after the regulation?
Yeah, boleto was a common source of frauds, because once you issue a boleto, it's impossible to identify the payer. Anyone can pay a boleto, even if it's issued under my name or your name. Anyone can pay a boleto. You can pay a boleto with cash at the bank, or you can pay it online. But there is no restriction on who the payer is. And so we had several different types of frauds involving boletos, using the barcodes, using Boleto to when the pandemic was striking in Brazil. There were several cases of boletos being used to withdraw funds from the assistance that was given by the government to poor people. Now we have PIX. Boleto is losing space for PIX. PIX is the instant payment system that is in place in Brazil. And in PIX we have cases where we have several cases of phishing where they issue a QR code for the payment, and the player believes he or she is making a deposit on the website, and in fact what they are doing is making a transfer to the fraudsters.
Yeah, and then obviously the classics like bonus abuse, the so-called, and then the so-called kind of friendly fraud, the chargebacks, those types of things, and those are certainly things that we've seen in other markets. And interestingly, that point that I was saying about in the UK when they changed the requirement to make the verification at the point of registration, that increase of identity fraud on gambling companies was really related to bonus abuse, because people knew that they needed a real identity, just like the name, the address, and the date of birth to go and open a gambling account. So I think it is going to be about having some of those additional measures in place to make sure that the data that is being used, if it is available data, publicly available data, like, the CPF, for example, is a, piece of data that's very widely available, that, it's backed up with additional data to make sure that you're actually doing an anti-impersonation check and checking it is the real person that you're dealing with, not someone that's just perhaps taken some stolen data and used it on a website. And just, we brushed over just a little bit around the anti-money laundering checks. I'd be really interested to know your view on AML in the Brazilian gambling sector and sports betting sector.
Yeah, in Brazil, all operators will have to identify the player by their CPF, as you explained. CPF is the Brazilian taxpayer number. And unlike other jurisdictions where people were concerned about sharing their taxpayer number or their social security number, as in the US, in Brazil, it's quite common to share your CPF. And the CPF database is also linked to the date of birth of the owner. So it can be used to verify age. And the CPF is also connected to bank accounts. And all payment system is based on the CPF. So one of the policies that will definitely be in place in Brazil is that any withdrawal can only be made to a bank account or a deposit account under the same CPF of the player, of the owner of that account, so that you can make sure that you're not paying the prices to a third party. When the PIX is also linked to the CPF, so it's very common also for the operators not to accept deposits from third parties. This was an issue, as I explained, with Boleto, but now that Boleto is, some operators are not even accepting Boletos anymore because of PIX. And with PIX, they can restrict that the deposits must be made by the player from his bank account or his deposit account. So we're able to track all the transactions, and those transactions will be informed to the regulator and to financial authorities. So if there's any suspicious activity, and the government, when it's regulated, they're going to define what suspicious activities are. That information will be provided to the government immediately.
Okay, that makes sense, and that'll be very similar to other markets, as well as doing things like politically exposed persons checks and sanctions checks, as well as people register. So what, identity verification, age verification is going to be important, anti-money laundering checks and fraud prevention. So just in terms of, I'm just really interested in terms of predictions, if you had a crystal ball, what would be your prediction for the Brazilian market as we move forward?
I think we have a great potential. Brazil can become one of the largest markets in the world. As a matter of fact, we are. Even without regulation, sports betting in Brazil is booming. If you see the numbers from last week with the World Cup, most of the sports betting traffic worldwide came from Brazil. Yeah, I usually joke and I tell my friends from the industry that the Brazilian market is larger than the US, because in the US it's based on each state, and Brazil is going to be a single market. So it has a great potential. I think that mistakes will be made. That's unavoidable. We don't have, I would say, we don't have an exclusive regulator. Regulation is under the Ministry of Economy. So one of the things that is going to happen probably with development in the industry is that we'll finally have a regulator that is exclusively dedicated to gambling, and I think that will make a difference. Okay, and I think the government has already noticed the potential of the industry with all the advertising and all the investments that are being made in the country by online gaming companies. I think now it's a matter of time. We had this transition in the government, but it's a matter of time to have gambling duly regulated in operation in Brazil.
But a huge opportunity. Super exciting. Super exciting. So I've got one final question for you. What's your predictions for the World Cup then? Who's going to win?
After watching the games, I would say that Brazil has a very good chance.
They do have a good chance. Excellent. Perfect. So you heard it here first. Brazil's going to win. So I just want to thank you so much for your time, Luiz. Really appreciate your insights. I want to thank everyone that's tuned in today. And if you have got any questions, please just drop them into the chat. And if you want to find out more about CAF, please drop us an email at commercial@caf.io. Thank you very much.
Thank you.